This is Jeff Mucci, RCR Wireless News. We're here today in Reston, Virginia at the Sprint Executive Briefing Center meeting with Dan Hayes, who's a principal, actually a director with PRTM. Dan, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
PRTM, I've heard the name for years, but I don't know exactly what you do, so tell us a little bit more about the company.
Sure, yeah. PRTM is an operational strategy consulting firm with a worldwide presence in 19 different offices. And we specialize in working with companies to help them translate their business strategy into how they execute and operate. So how they run the business, how that translates into their operations, what type of organizations they use, and the approaches that they need to operate successfully and be profitable.
So how large is the telecom practice?
The telecom practice is about a third of PRTM's worldwide revenue and staff. It's about 200 professionals worldwide, located in most of the major metropolitan centers where the tech industry has a presence.
So tell us a little bit about your customers and what you do for them.
PRTM works primarily with Fortune 500 and Global 1000 companies, but we also work with smaller private companies and even some startups. And what we do with them is help them to figure out how they can improve operations. So, for example, we might work with a company to drive some increased profitability by going through a cost reduction effort, or another day of the week, we might work with a company that is looking to achieve growth and help them figure out what is their product portfolio need to look like and how are they going to execute on investing to develop and deploy that.
So what types of companies do you work for within the telecom sector, wireless sector?
Within telecom, we have a very deep presence. PRTM started in this industry, and so we have, over the years, worked for virtually all of the major players. We work with many, if you look at the value chain, we work with many of the companies that provide the components that go into wireless and wireline equipment. We work with many of the actual network equipment manufacturers, virtually all of the major ones worldwide. And we also work with many of the mobile device companies that provide devices today, both in the traditional handheld devices as well as netbooks and other emerging devices. We also have a practice that works extensively with the operators worldwide, particularly in the wireless segment, as that segment has been challenged to deal with the operational issues of such rapid growth.
So what are the acute issues that the carriers are facing as they try to prepare and begin deploying 4G networks?
The deployment of 4G networks actually is creating a lot of new operational challenges for the wireless carriers. The first one is they have to figure out what their strategy is going to be to actually make money doing this. 4G brings lots of new opportunities for data services and enhanced services to end users, both enterprises and consumers. But at the same time, the business model is somewhat unproven, and it's unclear whether 4G is truly going to be an incremental ARPU to what customers pay for wireline broadband services, or whether it's going to be a replacement. There's also the critical need for many carriers, particularly those that aren't just starting from a greenfield stance, to figure out how they're going to migrate their customers from multiple generations of technologies over to 4G. Operating multiple generations of technologies is something we're hearing a lot about from the carriers as a concern for them in how they're going to successfully make money on their 4G investment. And finally, I think the other thing that the operators are really focusing on right now is the new operational models that they need to embrace for 4G. Many of them are looking at the transition to 4G networks as an opportunity to consider going to more of a managed services approach for running their networks, and also the new complexities of things like high-speed backhaul that they need. For many carriers, utilizing microwave or fiber backhaul in a big way is a new paradigm for them, and it's almost building another network on top of your network, and many of them don't have experience doing that. So there's a new challenge for them in terms of how they strategize and operate those networks.
So give us some examples of how you actually help them develop and then implement that strategy.
Well, one good example would be for a new 4G operator. We actually worked with them recently to develop their backhaul business model and their financial case for how they would make trade-off decisions at a market and even down to a site level about what backhaul technologies they would use. It's a complex mathematical problem, if you will, because you have to look at the interrelationships between multiple sites, particularly when you're deploying solutions like microwave that might require multiple hops and require a hub to effectively deploy. And also for fiber, you have to account for where it's available and what it might cost, which can be significant to bring it out to a site that doesn't currently have it. So we built a model and a framework for the carrier to actually make those decisions and support their deployment planning. And in the end, actually help them to think about how they might even create that backhaul capability as a new revenue source rather than just as a cost of operating the 4G network.
Interesting. And let's switch gears over to the OEMs. What
Sure.
are some of the challenges OEMs are having in this data explosion?
Yeah, well, the OEMs are really having a significant challenge, I think, on multiple fronts. The first one is last year's downturn really challenged them to take a hard look at their operations, consolidate them. Many of them have already outsourced much of their manufacturing to electronics manufacturers in Southeast Asia and Mexico. But we're seeing a significant upturn in demand now. And so right on the heels of having to consolidate and cut back production, they're now having to think about how do we scale up rapidly. And we're starting to see some significant demand shortages that are really testing the OEM's abilities to deliver. We're seeing that not only on the network equipment side, where you see companies like Cisco and JDS Uniphase really being tested, as well as the wireless companies like Alcatel-Lucent and Nokia Siemens. But you're also seeing it on the devices side. In the news recently, there have been lots of shortage of components that for the hottest mobile devices have been causing shortages, and now the carriers are starting to see the impact from their ability to sell to new customers.
Mm-hmm. How have you helped companies with their supply chain, getting down to actually the component level? Mm-hmm. Most of the handsets are outsourced and manufactured in Taiwan and places abroad. What roles has PRTM played in helping establish those relationships and put those contract manufacturing processes and facilities in place?
Yeah. Well, PRTM actually, about 20 years ago, created a supply chain model called SCORE, the Supply Chain Operations Reference Model. It's become the global standard for supply chain management. It's used from everybody from the Department of Defense to the electronics industry at large. And as part of the SCORE model, it looks at multiple elements of supply chain management, including planning, sourcing, manufacturing, delivery, and also reverse logistics. And within that, we work on very specific pieces of each of those links in the supply chain to help the OEMs and their partners throughout the supply chain operate more effectively. So one of the innovative practices that's really starting to take off right now is what's called large-scale lean supply chains, which is providing a greater degree of transparency across the supply chain so that the device manufacturers, the equipment manufacturers, and those that are providing the most basic components have visibility and transparency in almost real time so that they can see the demand that's coming their way and do a better job of scaling up and down their production and anticipating the needs of the market. A lot of the innovations in ERP systems have really helped to support that over the years, but it's a practice that just the leaders in the industry are now starting to embrace in a large way.
Okay. Where do you operate? What countries do you operate in today?
So in addition to our traditional base in the United States, PRTM operates in many countries worldwide. We have offices in the United Kingdom, France, Germany, in Dubai, in the UAE, offices in China, Japan, and India. But the wireless industry is worldwide, and so we certainly go where there's a need. And today, there's virtually not a country in the world that we don't operate in. We're working with carriers in Latin America. We're working with distributors in Australia and New Zealand. So lots of different places. Whereas you might not find things manufactured everywhere, people have phones in every country on the world.
You've got an incredible command of the business. What is your background in how did you come to be at PRTM?
Yeah, so I got my start. I'm a recovering electrical engineer and got my start in the industry actually working with IBM designing mobile PCs, and then wound up working at Intel and was actually involved in bringing the first smartphones to market back in the mid-90s, working with Nokia and RIM, the Nokia 9000 communicator and RIM when they were first turning their pagers into smartphones. And that got me really turned on to the wireless industry. I came to PRTM about 12 years ago really with a passion for helping to drive innovation and operational excellence within the industry, and have worked with it ever since.
Mm-hmm. How do you differentiate yourself from the other management consultants, the Bains, the McKinseys? What do you do different?
Yeah, PRTM is highly differentiated in management consulting. We have a very particular expertise which is helping companies to translate their strategy into how they operate. And we take a very hands-on approach to that. We prefer to work with companies in a very active basis. We're there side by side working with them in the trenches, and we tend to bring a very experienced set of people who have worked in industry and really know and understand the problems and the challenges that industries have on an operational basis. We have a very low ratio of consultants to partners, so all of us really work very hands-on with clients. There's nobody out there who's going to sell something to you and walk away. We're all very actively involved in really delivering results.
Interesting. So what specifically do you do for PRTM?
So I'm a partner in our telecom and electronics practice, and particularly focus on working within the wireless industry, a lot of which is time that is spent with both carriers as well as their partners in managed services, in the equipment side and in the device side. Part of our perspective at PRTM is that we try to offer an end-to-end view of the value chain. So when we go in to work with a company, we're not just trying to tell them and bring to them what others in their particular part of the industry do, but also help them to connect the dots between the rest of the value chain.
Mm-hmm. And we're going to be speaking on a panel later this evening at RCR local event here at the Reston Center. And one of the things we're going to be talking about are the value-added services that carriers can roll out to start making money on the investment they're making in 4G. Could you provide us some insights on what you see the future being in terms of how carriers can monetize their investments?
Yeah, I think there are actually a lot of opportunities to monetize 4G, but I think that many of them are going to require a fair degree of innovation and creativity from the carriers to bring them to market. The greatest risk for the industry is that 4G just becomes a faster, dumber pipe, and that the carriers continue to be commoditized as they compete against one another. We believe that there are a lot of opportunities, both in the consumer space, but perhaps even more importantly in the vertical markets, to deliver very tailored, industry-oriented solutions using technologies like location services and some of the higher speed capabilities that 4G brings. It's just the tip of the iceberg right now. We're seeing a lot of exciting demonstrations of what 4G can do, but I think the greatest challenge ahead for carriers in the next 12 to 24 months is really going to be just getting the networks up and operating. What I'd like to see is more carriers really thinking about what services they're going to offer when they launch. Because I think for the carriers to launch with the significant investment that 4G requires and not have those services to go along puts them at great risk.
Yeah. Dan, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.